Before we begin the snack and learn, 2 housekeeping items. First, you can find a copy of this presentation in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar panel. And second, we will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please submit your questions in the chat box. Our snack and learn today will talk about some insights into developing meaningful TCFD related disclosures. Before getting into the presentation, I'd like to introduce the team that will be on the call today. So I'm going to pass it to Michael Monshine, who will introduce himself.
Thank you, Rick. My name is Michael Monshine. I am the Director of Sustainability, Energy, and Climate Change with WSP USA. And I've spent the last, it's now 28 years as I age right before my eyes. I spent the last 28 years working on greenhouse gas emissions accounting and the last decade working on resilience. Emily?
Thank you, Michael. Emily Wasley. I lead the practice for WSP USA on corporate climate risk, adaptation, and resilience within Michael Monshine's Sustainability, Energy, and Climate Change team. I too have been in the adaptation and risk space for a while, and I'll pass it back over to Rick.
Thank you both. I lead the TCFD practice for WSP in Canada. We have a truly global practice, and obviously we work across borders and across oceans. I've been in the field basically since the TCFD was released, and lead on climate strategy, climate scenario analysis for multiple sectors. Our webinar today will touch on just a very brief introduction to the TCFD and some of our research, and then we want to take a good chunk of the presentation to talk through 2 examples, one for a leading investor and second for a Fortune 50 company. And then we'll talk about some anticipated evolution of TCFD reporting. So very briefly, in terms of what is TCFD, it's the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and it was a framework developed released in 2017 for investors to understand the climate risk within their portfolio. So a framework for companies to disclose to their investors how they're being impacted. It's holistic, focusing on governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. And it's the intent is for recognizing the physical changes in our climate and the risks and opportunities that come from a transition to a low carbon economy for investors and stakeholders to understand the risk at a company level. A unique aspect of the TCFD is its recommendation to conduct scenario analysis to stress test the resilience of the company to physical and transition related climate risks and opportunities. And it's to understand how a changing climate and how a transition to a low carbon economy can impact revenues, expenses, assets, liabilities, capital and financing. A real holistic financial impact assessment using scenario analysis. And since it was released, the interest has only accelerated. It's been largely voluntary until now, but in the recent year and the recent month, even in the last few months, there's been significant uptake in interest in TCFD, both from investors. There's a long list of some of the largest international investors from BlackRock, State Street, some of the largest pension funds in Canada, CPP Investments, and others who have really started pushing their investees to disclose on climate change and on climate risk in alignment with the TCFD. And at the same time, while voluntary in most jurisdictions, we're seeing securities regulators step into the discussion. And we expect, as indicated in the bottom panel, there's a number of countries who have directly implemented or have proposed implementing regulations. The list is as of the 2021 TCFD status report. We expect other jurisdictions, the US and Canada, to consider regulation in the future. And the US SEC has indicated as such in recent months. When we think about TCFD and the status of TCFD disclosures, whether or not it's meeting the ask of disclosures to help investors understand the risk within their companies, we find through our own research and in alignment with the TCFD's own research that the overall usefulness of those disclosures is still advancing. And some of the key elements to advance the overall usefulness of disclosures are encapsulated in that report, but very briefly, we find that there are clear actions that companies can take, such as conducting a scenario analysis, which is enhancing governance, enhancing risk management, that we don't have time to go into here, but you can review in that study and in the TCFD's own status report. I want to talk about, move on to a couple of examples of work that we've done for leading global companies, and the first being a leading global investor. And this is an investor with assets spread globally across multiple different sectors, real assets, renewable energy, lots of different sources. And what they wanted to understand and what we wanted to help them with was if you take that global portfolio, which is over 100 billion asset under management, where are the greatest risks and opportunities to their portfolio? And we conducted a screening level assessment for them to understand where those might be. And when we're doing this screening assessment for a company for large global companies such as this, or for other company, or for really any company, we tend to think about the risk using the exposure, vulnerability, and the value of the assets that are potentially at risk or as an opportunity to climate change. Exposure being what is changing. How is the climate changing? How is the economy changing around a specific asset within the portfolio? And again, we do this screening assessment across multiple elements of the portfolio. There is the vulnerability component, which is how does that changing climate, or how does that changing economy, the transition to a low carbon economy, impact the asset, and the value. So how valuable is the asset? Because all else equal, a more valuable investment is a higher risk or a higher opportunity than a lower value asset. And we use this, I'll go through some details about how this was done, but we use the screening assessment to understand the top assets at risk, the overall risk within the portfolio, and last but not least, this is a very important educational opportunity for our clients, because they want to enhance their climate-related risk management. They want to develop meaningful TCFD disclosures. So in this assessment, which was built bottom up with their input using our knowledge of climate data and of sector level vulnerabilities, it helped them understand how they could consider climate risk into their management going forward. And speaking of the results, we consider the analysis under two different streams, one being transition, or the risk of a transition to a low carbon economy, and another being physical impacts of climate change, which we'll speak to on the next page. So this is just a very high level and sanitized outlook from that analysis. There's a selection of a handful of companies. So what we can do is we can say on the short term, the medium term, the long term, what's the overall transition risk? What's the risk or opportunity if a transition to a low carbon economy were to occur? And we can look at it under multiple different scenarios. So we can look at it whether it's a smooth or orderly scenario, or we can look at it whether it's a more of an abrupt, disorganized scenario. So if you're taking an oil and gas pipeline, so obviously that's a risk in all timeframes, but it's actually a higher risk if there's a more disorganized transition. So you can look at it under different scenarios and assess risk, but you can also obviously look at opportunities. And while this list is sorted by overall risk, it's important to acknowledge the opportunities that the portfolio presents through data transmission, battery storage, and data centers within the portfolio. We also look at the physical impacts of climate change, and what we helped educate the client on was what are appropriate metrics to assess, how do you assess those at a global scale and at a very local scale for the company. So for each company, we looked at every asset and built an overall score for the company across the entire portfolio for heat stress, drought, water stress. And we pull the climate science data for our clients and turn it into a qualitative vulnerability score, so they can use a visualization such as this to identify their risks. So you can see that wildfire and heat stress are very important risks for at least the companies that we've selected with the snapshot. And again, what the investor in the end uses this for is to identify the companies that are most at risk and need a more dedicated analysis to help them become more resilient and preserve portfolio value. And the next example, which Emily will lead through, it's separate from this discussion, but it's an example of how we can conduct a more deep dive assessment with a company. Emily?
Excellent, thank you, Rick. So this is another example of a current client of ours, a leading technology company that has a global presence, and their climate journey really started in 2015 with the leadership of Michael and in partnership with the company and its various different business groups. So really the first step was to understand whether climate change was a material risk to the company. So through that journey, there was we conducted a preliminary physical risk assessment. Then we went into the transition risk assessments, looking at also the opportunities around transitioning to a low carbon economy, what that might that mean for the technology company? How could they be a part of the solution? How could they be a part of that transition more significantly in the market? Then we got into more extensive scenario analysis with them and really dove deep into what are the specific risks at the various different asset locations that they have around the world, and did some actually in-person site visits. This was before COVID, and around 2017 to 2018. And those site visits really helped to better understand and validate the scenario analysis findings that we did with the company on the ground, but also asking key questions to the facility managers of, what is your capacity to adapt to these changes in the climate, whether it was physical impacts, but also the transition. What are they investing in terms of renewable energy, on-site, off-site? How are they partnering with the local community? So it was a really good chance for us to ask some key questions and really get into the weeds with the facility managers who know those locations best. In 2019, the company hired a dedicated climate risk and resilience lead who really pushed the needle on aligning with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures with the launch then in 2020 of an internal working group. And it's so important to have a solid governance structure in place because of ownership, accountability, and really being able to drive this from within. So the working group came together monthly. It reported up to an internal climate council, and we were able to make some really significant progress on quantifying the financial impacts of climate change, giving estimates because the future is still very uncertain, but being able to quantify the climate-related physical and transition risks and opportunities really built the business case for why there needs to be even more investment and awareness and attention to not only the current changes in the climate, but future changes. We developed a climate risk and resilience plan, which has some concrete goals and key result actions that need to be taken. And then with that, again, we went back and instead of doing in-person site visits, we did virtual site visits because of COVID and because it also helped to reduce our emissions and the company's emissions by not traveling all over the world to do these site visits. So that has been our journey. It's ongoing and has been such a joy because this is a client that's really invested and very interested in shaping the market and moving the market for transitional change and transformational change. Next slide. So through our TCFD work with our clients, we generally start with an overarching gap analysis. And this gap analysis is informed by over 70 indicators that we have developed through our experience with our clients, through the expertise that we have on our team, and just insights on trends that we know are coming based on what we've seen in the past. So we have about 70 indicators in a proprietary tool that we use to benchmark and assess our clients so that they can also understand what progress needs to be made and then track that progress over time. So on the screen here, you can see the 4 core elements of TCFD, the 11 core disclosures, and then through the research that Rick mentioned earlier, we were able to actually have a rating, a maturity rating of basic, improving, mature, leading, based on the indicators that we have. So over time, as you can see, the company began really tracking its alignment with TCFD in February 2020. Those are the red dots, and over the year, they were able to really make some significant progress in the strategy realm, which is because they were able to conduct a quantitative scenario analysis that had financial assessment and indicators in that process. And then with the risk management process, they were able to start to build in climate change into their risk taxonomy and really think about the controls that were in place to not only prepare for climate change today, but also into the future. Next slide. So this last slide really illustrates some of the outputs that we develop, and apologies for the vagueness, but we do hold our clients in confidential status for good reason. But this is a graphic that illustrates kind of their total risk amongst the various scenarios that we run our clients under for the scenario analysis. So we chose to select the RCP 8.5 and RCP 8.4, so a high and a lower emission scenario. And you can see that the total risk is pretty significant. You can see the differences between the total physical risk and the total transition risk. Now, one thing to note is that this was a scenario analysis based on their assets, not on their supply chain, not on their customers. So it did not include the full value chain, which may actually increase their transition risk if and when we do that analysis moving forward. So let me stop there and turn it back over to Rick.
So I think I've got the ball here, Rick. Yeah, thank you, Emily. And Emily alluded to the fast evolving market for TCFD disclosure and the techniques and expectations in the delivery of those disclosures. To date, investors have been satisfied with qualitative assessments of climate-related risk and a reassurance that climate risk has been incorporated into existing enterprise risk management processes. But over time, they're increasingly demanding quantitative measures of impact on revenue and earnings. As alluded to on the introductory slides by Rick, regulators in Europe have already established deadlines for TCFD-aligned reporting. And in the US, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has signaled it will likely follow suit. It's probably too late for that to happen in 2022, but it is highly likely for 2023. Unfortunately, efforts to align with TCFD may have unintended consequences, including divestment from assets that will only be purchased by less progressive actors, and/or removal of assets from already underserved communities. Since climate risk not only can impact the value of equity holdings, but also the quality of debt holdings, government and other nonprofit organizations who seek debt financing will likely be expected to similarly disclose in alignment with TCFD recommendations. Right now, TCFD focuses on inherent risk, but more and more disclosures will seek descriptions of adaptation planning and remaining residual risk. Similarly, to date, we have only seen isolated credit risk and interest rate adjustments based on climate risk. But when honed, the TCFD disclosures will likely greatly expand the phenomenon of altering interest rates depending on the risk associated with climate. To date, climate risk has been at the purview of the sustainability team or investment relations, and management of this risk was often handled at the site or business line level. It will grow to be elevated into the C-suite and reporting directly to the board, eventually leading to the common position of Chief Resilience Officer. It has become clear that public dollars are no longer going to be going to flow to infrastructure projects that embed the same vulnerabilities as they have in the past. So we have seen, sites flooded, rebuilt, flooded, rebuilt, flooded, rebuilt. And that's not going to keep happening unless new resilience measures are implemented. In order to receive financing, projects will need to prove their resiliency. And with that, I will open it up the floor to questions, and we're happy to answer any questions that anybody may have submitted or may have. Sharon, do you have some questions for us?
Thank you, Michael, Emily, and Rick, for a fantastic presentation. So before moving into the Q&A period, I would like to remind attendees to enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform, and also the PDF of this presentation is available to download in the handout box on the platform. I will start with the first question. What are the shortcomings of TCFD recommendations, if any?
Thank you for that question. That's an important question because it is a great tool, but it doesn't do everything by any stretch of the imagination. And I alluded to this when I described the unintended consequences when I was talking about the future of TCFD. And one of those unintended consequences is that it really doesn't address justice and equity issues. And I think there's a movement afoot, whether directly through TCFD or outside of TCFD, to integrate that. Another shortcoming is it's very ambitious, and it's not that easy, to be quite frank, to do a really good disclosure along the lines with TCFD. And while the guidelines and recommendations have been developed, the tools and methodologies to implement that are just now starting to catch up. And I'd say overall, this really isn't a shortcoming. But I think while TCFD is important for evaluating risk, in many ways, it may be more valuable as a business strategy tool. There is considerable uncertainty in the risk from the physical impacts of climate change. There is considerable uncertainty related to the policies we will implement to address climate change. But we know that if we can create some boundary conditions, that we can have a more informed set of business strategies. And we can really, I think one thing we found is there's a lot of opportunities associated with climate change that we can take advantage of to make our businesses and our organizations more efficient, more equitable, and more resilient.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a question here about can this gap analysis and peer benchmarking be applied at project level to assist with our future ready approach?
And I'll cover that. So yes, it absolutely can, and we're doing that with one of our other clients on some renewable energy projects that they're wanting to invest in. So before they actually developed the project, we ran a physical climate change risk assessment on the project location over a time horizon that was going to be the operating time horizon of that infrastructure project. And truly, it's a way, TCFD is a way to not only understand what your current risks are, but also future risks. So that's the whole purpose of the future scenario analysis. So if you do have a project that is already in existence, you can run a scenario analysis to see what the physical impacts are, and you can also understand kind of what the transition risks might be on that location based on regulations that are either coming down the pipeline or existing, carbon pricing, and if you know, as Rick mentioned earlier, if it's an oil and gas project, they may have higher transition risks than others. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you. What data do we need to build a climate scenario analysis?
Rick, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll field that. So it depends on whether you need multiple different. If you're building your own scenario analysis bottom up, there are a few different data sets you might want to consider. If you're looking at the physical impacts of climate change, you would want to identify forward-looking data that gives you an indication of the increased risk of climate change effects like heat stress, of flooding, of conditions that can lead to wildfire, although wildfires are a difficult thing to predict, difficult thing to capture. But drought, all these sort of forward-looking data, and there are different platforms that are available to provide this at sort of different levels of complexity depending on your comfort with the data and with the science. And you need those to be forward-looking and ideally distributed from or sourced from the same models used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. If you're looking at transition impact, there are different energy-related scenarios that help capture that are more normative in nature, that capture what is needed to change in our energy system and in our industrial emissions to achieve different emissions targets, whether that's Paris alignment or 1.5 degree net zero. And these are available usually specifically for the energy industry, but can also capture broader macroeconomic data. So there's a lot of different data sets. There are different levels of expertise necessary in order to capture them. But I generally think that you need forward-looking climate data for physical risks and some kind of energy system modeling for transition.
Thank you. Can you address how companies should think about which specific climate warning scenarios they choose?
Emily, do you want to offer some thoughts on that?
I can offer some thoughts. Rick just gave a little bit of insight into that, but it's really dependent upon a variety of different things. You know, we work with our clients to figure out what scenarios work with their model, but also what are realistic. So we tend to, for the physical risk assessment, if they want to make sure that they are going to be prepared for what would be continued emissions released into the atmosphere, we would suggest a high emission scenario, which is currently RCP 8.5. For the transition risks, we definitely want to look at a variety of different transitions, and Rick just mentioned there's the 2 degree scenario and then 1.5 degree. So there's a lot of kind of education around why and how that we do with our clients, and that has been really insightful to them, because then they have a better understanding of when they're talking to their investors, really why they chose these scenarios, how risk tolerant are they, and what are they preparing for.
I think what Emily just, go ahead, Rick.
The one thing I would add is sometimes we have alternative pressures. The example we gave, they are a signatory to the Principles for Responsible Investment, and though they want, as a PRI signatory, they are asked to review not just sort of a smooth transition, but a more disorderly, because those can be more disruptive, particularly for energy system and for investors. So it can also be external pressures as well.
And you know, what Emily and Rick just described is we want to create boundary conditions so that the clients understand the worst case scenario on either side of either transition risk or physical risk, because there's a trade-off. So if we have a low emission scenario, that means we have implemented a number of technological changes, a number of regulatory changes that will impact our clients. If we have a high emission scenario, that means we haven't implemented those changes. So their transition risk would be lower, but the physical risk would be higher. So there's a little bit of a continuum that goes along those lines between transition risk and physical risk, and we try to get those two aligned.
Thank you. Does the assessment of climate risk impact covers the firm's supply chain?
So I will take that, and you know, ultimately it certainly should. In fact, what we find is risks that companies face are often larger upstream in their supply chain or downstream in the products and services they provide and where they get their revenues. Certainly the opportunities are greater in the products and services than in their actual operations. Now, typically we will begin with their operations because the data are readily available. It's easier, and you want to make sure you have things buttoned up at home, so to speak, before you start reaching out upstream and downstream. But ultimately, you're going to want a comprehensive value chain assessment.
Thank you. I will take the last question. Sorry, we have additional ones which will be answered directly by email. Can you elaborate more about the idea of establishing a governance structure internally for TCFD, and what should that look like?
I think Emily is smiling at that question, so we're going to let Emily take that one.
Sure, and I'll try to be quick, but what we like to do is kind of understand what the existing governance structure looks like now. And as Michael alluded to in his remarks, a lot of times that when we talk about climate change, it sits within the sustainability team. So to elevate it, which is what investors want to see, they want to see that there is a committee that is responding to the board, but also listening to the board in terms of direction and guidance. So it really depends on the type of company you are and how aggressive you want to be with acting on climate change. Some companies have board members that are already informed about climate change. There are some that haven't yet talked about it on their agenda. So generally, we like to see a committee formed that has members from the traditional ESG or sustainability team, but also incorporating folks from enterprise risk management or business continuity so that the physical impacts of climate change are represented in that broader committee. Michael or Rick, do you want to add anything?
I think you've summarized it well. Thank you.
Likewise.
Fantastic, thank you. So we are at the end of our webinar session. Please feel free to follow up directly here with the team via the contact details shown on the screen. And I would like to thank all attendees for joining today. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, Michael, Emily, and Rick for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day or evening, depending on your geography. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I will wrap up the webinar now. Thank you.